Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com, and I'd love to talk with you about a subject near and dear to my heart, which is alternate histories, and something called the Mandela Effect. So to start with, I'd like to share with you a quote by Nelson Mandela, which is, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And that makes this subject so much more interesting to me, because actually what I'm talking about today is the fact that lots of people, myself included, remember that Nelson Mandela passed away while he was incarcerated. He was the president of South Africa, and for a period of time, in this current reality, I think 27 years, he was in prison. However, the surprising thing is, I'm not the only one that remembers that he passed away while he was in jail. Lots of other people do too. At the time, it was devastating. It's not something that I would have wanted to have happened. And so, I have to tell you the truth, I was really surprised when I found out he'd been released from prison, because I thought, wait a minute, didn't he die in prison? Apparently not. At least not in this reality. And so, this is what I mean when I mention this Mandela Effect. It's the case of lots of people, not just me, probably you, or if not you, then someone you know, remembering that Nelson Mandela passed away while he was in jail. In other words, there's a different history that people do remember. I discussed this very subject on a recent program on Coast to Coast AM with George Newry, and lots of people called in during that show to share some of their stories about remembering things that had been different than seem to be the case right now. This would include all kinds of things. So you might notice a different history when you watch a movie and it seems like it's a different movie than the one you remember before, or when you read a book for the second time. Sometimes we do that when there's a book we really love, but the second time you read it, it's not the same book that it was the first time. Also with TV shows, and sometimes with conversations with friends. But getting back to that subject of Nelson Mandela, this topic is a big one, and it's the first time that it came to my attention was back in 1984 when I noticed that a cat that had died was alive again. Here's a picture of the cat. That's the cat named Ashes, and this was my ex-roommate's cat. She had been living with me across the street from where I had moved, and her cat would still come and visit me occasionally. Sometimes he'd cross the street and just come and say hi. But he'd passed away. At least that's what my roommate had told me. He'd been hit by a car. And I believed her, and I was devastated because I really wanted to at least get to see him again. So when one day he showed up in my garden looking a little bedraggled, like he hadn't been washing himself, but definitely still the same cat, I was really surprised. And I came to tell my husband about it, and I didn't tell him very much. I just said, look, here's Ashes. My husband was very confused. He looked at the cat and said, wait a minute, didn't Ashes die? I said, yes, that's what I thought. And he said, wasn't he hit by a car or something? That's exactly what I remembered as well. So sometimes it's a big relief when we can share an alternate history with someone who remembers it the same way that we do. Sharing that shift in reality experience can be validating, so we're more certain that we're not losing our mind or something, or just getting incredibly forgetful. This story is covered in my book, Reality Shifts, When Consciousness Changes the Physical World. And I also have conducted surveys over the years with my website, Reality Shifters, and some of the surveys that I've done have had to do with types of reality shifts. In the case of the alive again phenomenon, in addition to people volunteering stories and telling me that a friend that they knew, or a relative, or someone they went to school with, they had definitely seen their obituary, or maybe they'd heard from a friend this person had passed away, and then, next thing they know, like not too long after, that individual is alive again. So it's a pretty big topic, and it seems to happen with remarkable regularity. Some of the people who've been noticed being dead and then alive again through the survey that I conducted about 8 years ago, almost 10 years ago, include Bob Keeshan, who was known as Captain Kangaroo, and he was reported by 26% of the survey respondents. That's more than 1 in 4 people remembered definitely, yes, he died and then he's alive again. And as of today, when I'm recording this, as far as I know, he's dead again. Jane Goodall came up 15% of the time, and she's the one that worked with the chimpanzees. I'm really glad that she's alive again because I really admire her and her work. I think she's a beautiful human being. Larry Hagman, 15% of the people surveyed reported that he had died and then was alive again. I think he's dead again as of today. I'm not sure, but I think that's the case. Bob Hope was reported 10% of the time. Jack Palance, 10% of the time. B. Arthur, an actress, 5% of the time. Ed Asner, 5%. Walter Cronkite, 5%. And Mariel Hemingway, 5%. So lots of people are remembering other histories, and that brings up an amazing question. What's going on? Why would we be remembering, especially so many people, remembering the same very strange set of circumstances? It's pretty specific, too. In the case of Nelson Mandela, the people who remember that he passed away tend to remember the same thing I remember, which is that he died while he was still incarcerated. So this raises the question that apparently we are living in parallel universes. That's not too surprising to quantum physicists and to ever-increasing number of physicists who, when surveyed, definitely will assure you that we exist in a superposition of states. That includes you and me and everything. This book, everything in the world, definitely exists in a superposition of states. What does that mean? It means that in a very real sense, with a great probability, we can say that this book and me are here right now. But there's also a chance that we might exist perhaps in another world. That's one of the theories to explain what's going on. And if that's the case, you can imagine that there's another universe where you and I are living a very different life. Which brings me to my favorite question of all, which I'd like to close with and leave you thinking about today. And that's the question, how good can it get? I'd like you just to sincerely, with all your heart, ask that question for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for the world. And I invite you to find out by asking that question, just how good can it get? Until next time, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com.